Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Right Now on WILI 1400 AM and FM 95.3. My name is Brian Saucier, and I am pleased to get to speak to you on this lovely July 2nd, 2026. I'm in the studio with Chris Reddy, the host of the show. I'm just a guest host for the first half today. And as we just heard on that warning, it is insanely hot outside today, but I want to offer some words of encouragement. In this wonderful state of Connecticut, we may have, 5 or 6 days of summer where it's just too darn hot.
Yeah.
And we have about that same many days in the winter when it's just too cold to go outside. And then what is it for the other 350 days a year? This is a beautiful state to live in. So I am happy to be fighting for this state in whatever way I can because I love living in Connecticut.
I do as well. What a great state. And it really is a great time of year also. We have a bunch of great events coming up this weekend right in the area here that I'm really looking forward to. I do just want to interject as a medical professional. Again, I said this on Monday. Please take care of your friends, your neighbors, your family. Keep an eye out for them during this really dangerously hot weather. It's just so humid right now that it's difficult to try and regulate body temperature and keep yourself hydrated enough. Try and stay inside as much as possible. If you do have to be outside, make sure you're taking lots of breaks. And also keep an eye out for people that look like they're suffering from heat emergencies. As a paramedic and someone who taught EMT and paramedic classes for years, there's really, 3 quick levels of heat-related exhaustion that you have to be concerned about. And usually you want to see when people are in that flushed, sweaty, hot, exhausted look, get them out of the environment, start cooling them off. One thing that really throws people is that when you get to true heat exhaustion, and now the body is dehydrated to the point that you're starting to go into shock, you can actually have somebody that feels cold and clammy and still have a very dangerous, serious heat-related emergency going on. When you get to the point where someone is hot and dry, or they're having a seizure, or they're unresponsive, truly life-threatening, and that's heat stroke. And your brain starts cooking when it gets over 106 degrees for a core body temperature. So those are the ones where immediate life-threatening danger, and you want to initiate 911. But just keep an eye out for people. Recognize that if someone looks like they've been exerting themselves outside for any amount of time and look like they're not doing well, get them some attention. Make sure you're checking on them. Like I said, these are really dangerous conditions right now for the next couple of days.
Yep, and we're just not used to it. Like I said, this is an exception here, so you got to change your patterns on days like this. All right, well, let's dive into what we have for today. We've got some national news tied back to some Connecticut news, which ties back to some of my remarks from last week. So 2 Supreme Court cases that have made the headlines. The most recent one is our all things CCDL coming back. I mentioned last week that was sort of my intro into the political world was in 2013 in that push for gun control in Connecticut. After Sandy Hook, there was a major gun control laws passed, and those launched a major response from groups like CCDL, which I was very active in at the time. And, this is an example of how slow the wheels of justice turn. 13 years later, that case has now woven its way through the various levels of courts and appellate courts and circuit courts and state courts and this courts and that courts. And now the Supreme Court has just agreed to hear arguments for that case.
October is when they're expecting to be listening to those. So once they return from this summer break, hopefully we'll have some more information about this.
Yep, and
go ahead.
There's been a steady series of decisions in the last, 10 years that have, it's encouraging that we might be able to buy regular old rifles that happen to scare a small segment of the population, and they come up with this invented terminology, assault weapon. We might be able to buy those again in Connecticut someday.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I do want to give some credit to the 3 lawyers who have brought this up through the court. 2 of them happen to be state representatives in Connecticut. One of them right here locally, Doug Dubitsky, and the other one is Craig Fishbein, who, as state representatives and lawyers, have been following this case through, as you said, the appeals court last year. It was August of 2025 that they held the ban, saying that this was something that, because it was a unusually dangerous weapon, that they sided with Connecticut, that there should be some sort of ban restriction in place for these sales, and that's why it's now elevated to this U.S. Supreme Court case.
That's right, and and Doug and Craig and others have done just plain a service to their community for years to carry this forward. So thank you for that effort. This whole notion of unusual firearms, like, okay, there was a big uproar for this in 2013, and there's hundreds of thousands of people in Connecticut that own these weapons and don't do a thing with them other than hunt or target shoot or keep them in case they need to defend themselves, and don't commit any crimes whatsoever. And these guns have been in existence in circulation since the 50s and 60s. Yet somehow they're painted with this outlandish label, and then anybody that objects is, you're an extremist. But don't tell me or anybody with a brain that I can't look at trends. And and how has that trend carried forward in Connecticut? Well, we talked about this last week. Yet another portion of very normal and widely available firearms are now banned in Connecticut. That would be just a whole bunch of regular semi-automatic handguns. So
that only have the potential to be converted, not actually converted weapons. Like, it's just the fact that it is a gun that could have something done to it to change its ability or rate to fire.
Right.
And this is where you start to see some of the terminology they use in some of the legislation. And one of the things that really gets me, and this is part of these Supreme Court cases, is that they've labeled certain guns that should be part of these bans as uniquely designed to create mayhem or destruction.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean,
again,
is that the actual wording in?
Yeah,
in
I have it actually right here
it's
that I wrote down. Uniquely designed to create mayhem.
Right. Yet somehow there's been millions upon millions of them in circulation for decades, for 100 years. That a semi-automatic pistol design has been around for 120 years. And essentially unchanged. And yet they're what uniquely designed to cause mayhem. And now you may be sitting there scratching your head like, how do they come up with this stuff? And again, I'm going to offer my explanation. Don't try to make sense of it. There's a concept that I'm sure I'm not the only person to come up with this, but it's basically like opposite day. If you're trying to understand why somebody in the government did something that you just can't wrap your head around, take their words and invert them. So in this case, if they're saying that, oh, we're all doing this so we can keep you safer, and you say, okay, well, I just can't square those two. It just doesn't make sense. Employ the opposite day tactic and invert it and say, well, maybe they're actually trying to make you less safe. And then why would they want to do that? Well, because they want to control you. They want you to be dependent on them because they want power. That is where you can start to make sense of some of this stuff. If you try to analyze it from you try to read their language about, geez, is a Glock an object of mayhem? Are the people that have been carrying them around just
an assault-style weapon?
Are they just,
please tell me what that is.
Right, and are they just operators of mayhem, just waiting to devastate our communities? No, of course they're not. So, that's making the headlines. It's come full circle. I keep using the word maybe and might because if I can switch gears to the next topic related to the Supreme Court, unless you have anything else on the gun control one, is the Supreme Court, for all their worth, comes up with decisions, even though we've got, 6 so-called conservatives now on the Supreme Court, yet they come up with decisions like they did last week that birthright citizenship is somehow enshrined in our Constitution. And my phone timed out on me, but this is, of course, a reference to the 14th Amendment.
Yep.
which holds, I'm going to read the very first part here. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. The Constitution, is certainly the amendments, they're sweet and simple. It's not like you got to read 80,000 pages of legal code. So that one sentence somehow has been interpreted by our vaunted justices of the Supreme Court to say that if somebody comes here illegally with no desire to integrate into our nation, with no desire to learn our language, with no desire to come to appreciate our heritage, our foundation, the principles that drive our nation, and they have a baby while they're here. Let's say that it happens a week after, 2 weeks after, a month after, who doesn't matter when, but somehow this person that is here illegally and does not want to be part of our nation, our society, our state, our culture, if they have a baby, somehow, some reason, because of this 14th Amendment, they are citizens. They are automatically birthright citizens, just the same as that family that, their 13th great-grandfather came off the Mayflower. They're exactly the same as that. And nobody thinks like that. You have to be in the government to come up with that sort of stuff. And there's this, we miss these little words. The word "and" is in that sentence I just read. It says, "and they are subject to the jurisdiction thereof." Like by definition, if somebody's here illegally, they are not subject to the jurisdiction of our nation. And and I saw something circling around in various outlets in the last few days that the senator that introduced this amendment to the Senate in like 1860 whatever said explicitly this does not apply to the children of foreign dignitaries and that are maybe living here long term in a foreign embassy, which is a much more understandable situation where, you might have a baby here. There's a foreign diplomat that lives here for 5 years and he had 3 kids. No, they're not Americans. They're French. They're from the diplomat from France. It doesn't apply to people in that situation. It doesn't apply to people that are here illegally, which is just purest of common sense.
I agree with you. And there's an aspect of this also that concerns me even further is that there actually is tourism to the United States specifically for the purpose of exploiting this type of loophole. And one of the very common demographics that you see is that it's from China. And you have people who purposely are trying to use this loophole, and you have situations where someone comes here, has a child, has now U.S. citizenship, and then returns and gets educated and brought up in China, but has that ability to now claim citizenship in the United States. And this is something that is a paid industry in China for the purpose specifically of manipulating this loophole.
Yep. And this is just kind of the latest slap in the face to a general theme that's been developing for decades, that somehow Americans we're the only people on the planet that are not allowed to protect our culture. Like if you, the example I always come back to is Japan, right? As Japan is an island. It's a little island. So kind of as a starting point, it's more of an isolated culture by definition because they're surrounded by water everywhere. And nobody blames the Japanese for wanting to maintain a Japanese culture. They have very strict immigration laws. If you want to move to Japan, there's 80,000 hoops you have to jump through. If you want to buy property, own property in these other countries, it's all just common sense stuff. Like part of the purpose of a civil government is to protect the integrity of a nation. But somehow we're not allowed to do that in here. We're not allowed to value our own culture and then protect our own culture or value our heritage. We're not allowed to do these things somehow. We're really the only country in the nation that's that's burdened with that.
Yeah, and I was thinking that as you first started introducing this topic a few minutes ago, that absolutely that's the case. You can't go to another country the way that you could come to the United States and just say, you know what, I'm here, I'm going to stay, and I'm entitled to everything that every other citizen gets just by being here.
Right.
And I've had friends who have tried to move to New Zealand and applied, both of them physicians, and were told no.
Right.
And
they were told no without apology.
Yeah.
It was just like, nope, get out of here. We don't want you. See you later. We don't have to explain why. Yep. We're choosing to not let us people in because we just don't want to, period. And, it's like you can apply, and there's so many good memes going around out of this decision. Like one of them was, a picture of the sign said, baby born at Olive Garden automatically gets Italian citizenship. It's like, and they're making jokes out of something, but it's really absurd. Like nobody says, okay, if somebody's visiting your house, you have a guest living there and they have a baby, are they a member of your household now?
Part of your family,
yeah. I mean, maybe if you wanted them to be, sure, but what if you don't? So
Go ahead. Yeah, you can finish up.
I wanted to kind of switch gears from these topics and tied into my points last week, and I brought up a lot of things to talk about from a Christian perspective, and I talked about how I want to re-inject the idea as a starting point that the civil government ought to legislate, ought to act and operate itself as if God exists. And then, which God? Well, the Christian God. And why the Christian God? Because that's our history here. And a very natural objection that I would expect, talking to the vast majority of people out there, is because given the environment we've been raised in, and what we're taught in public schools and everything. We've been just told it just is the way it is someone's going to shout very quickly, but what about the separation of church and state? It's like, okay, well, what does that mean, the separation of church and state? Where did that idea come from? Like many things, we have an amazing, wonderful history in the state of Connecticut. That phrase, separation of church and state, first came into our public conversation in the very early 1800s in a letter written to Thomas Jefferson, by the Danbury Baptist Church. And I think it was 1802. And Jefferson, it was in a response to the Danbury Baptist Church by Thomas Jefferson, because they wrote a letter to the president at the time and said, we're very concerned, Mr. President, about the Congregational Church in Connecticut. We're concerned about the power they have to wield against us Baptists. Why did they have power? Because for almost 200 years in the state of Connecticut, the Congregational Church was the established denomination for the state. Forget to claim it was a Christian society, which of course it was. They had their own particular brand of Christianity. That was the denomination in the state of Connecticut until 1818, I believe. So Jefferson responded to this church and saying, and I'm paraphrasing, says, don't worry, there's a wall of separation between the church and the state. So it's true. In general, this concept of separation of church and state, it's real, but what does it mean? Does it mean that the state gets to act as if God doesn't exist? It's certainly never met that in our history. It's what it means today in its very weaponized and distorted sense. But what it meant, and this is one of the greatest accomplishments of, I think, the branch of Protestantism into Christian doctrine, is that the church and the state are, in fact, separate institutions. And those two institutions have a distinct sphere of influence. They have distinct responsibilities. They have distinct authority. And we should think of them as separate institutions. This goes back to where did the 13 colonies, where did we all come from? We came from Europe. And in Europe, they had hundreds of years of religious wars between Christians. So our fathers brought an idea here called like the spheres of influence, that the civil government has a sphere of influence and the church government has a sphere of influence, and the two are in fact separate. But it never, ever, ever meant that the state could just act as if God doesn't exist, which is where we are today, which has led to all sorts of disasters in our culture, disasters in our society, disasters in our families, disasters in our homes. So there's a lot more to talk about here, and there's a whole other range of objections when somebody who's running for office, as I am, is going to start injecting ideas of faith into the conversation. And I want to meet those objectives. I want those objections. I want to talk about them, and we'll get some call-ins and we'll get some other listeners. I want to get somebody on the show to have a counterpoint and tell me why I'm wrong on these topics, and I want to debate them on it. So
yeah, we'll probably be able to find that in the future. We definitely will. But if you do want to call in, 860-456-1400. We still have just a couple more minutes left before the end of the first segment here. Do you have anything else that you want to
Yeah, I mean, here's another objection we're going to hear from somebody is you can't legislate morality. That's sort of a phrase that is thrown around in many different political circles of different stripes. And my response to that is morality is the only thing you can legislate. What is a law? A law is something that we have institutionalized as wrong. Or a law that says you cannot murder. That is morality. A law that says you cannot have 3 wives. These are moral laws. So and there's another objection can tie it into is we're supposed to be religiously neutral. There's no such thing as neutrality. In each of these topics we could spend a long time talking about. There's no such thing as neutrality, which leads to another phrase that is sort of like a Swiss Army knife. If you're in these kinds of debates, it's not whether but which. It's not whether you're going to legislate morality, it's which morality you're going to legislate.
Sure, yeah.
It's not whether the civil government is going to represent some kind of religion. It's a question of which religion is it going to represent. For the last 60 years, we have explicitly represented a secular religion from the standpoint of civil government. And for 329 years, we were an explicitly Christian society in Connecticut. We're celebrating our 250th anniversary as a nation. Connecticut is coming up on its 400th anniversary. Right. We're at 390 years. We were founded in 1636. So there's so much richness to explore in that history, and there's so much of it that we need to recover and understand better to navigate the various messes we're in today.
Yeah, and when you look around at a lot of these small rural towns in eastern Connecticut, including my own Scotland, really founded because of what they felt was religious persecution from Wyndham. That's why they established that entire town. And there's a lot of small rural towns in eastern Connecticut that in the early 1700s followed that same exact plan, where they were looking for another way to express their religion on their own terms and as they saw fit, and really moved away from larger congregations such as Willimantic out to Scotland.
That is in our Yankee DNA. Is to be independent, to be stubborn, and to to want to go our own way. And that led to an amazing level of industriousness and achievement in this state, which is also sadly in a rearview mirror. But so much of this can be recovered. It's still there. It's still our history to reclaim and then build on and bring into the future.
All right. We're at the bottom of the hour right now. This has been the first segment of Right Now on WILI 1400 AM, 95.3 FM. We'll be right back after the break. And now Act Blue has reemerged in the news here because when I talked about it, it was with a very specific lean to Connecticut because of something that had happened and what a former Secretary of the State candidate was able to find out. And I'm going to go into that story in just one second here. But when you make a political contribution, you simply can't Venmo or PayPal to a candidate and then have that candidate use that money for campaigning. there's very specific information that has to be part of a individual contribution form in order for it to be considered a legal donation to a campaign or a political action committee. For kind of partisan effect, there is very distinctly one site that leans Democrat and another site that leans Republican. Okay. In the Democrat side, that's the one we were talking about right now, Act Blue. On the Republican side, it's Win Red. And what this does is it allows for an online contribution site so that a candidate can have a Win Red or an Anadot account or an Act Blue account that's linked to their campaign banking account, which tracks all of this information. So they want to know occupation of a donor to make sure that this isn't someone who is potentially a lobbyist or someone who bids on contracts, to make sure this is all fair and above board and that there's transparency to see how big money donates to political campaigns and political action committees. So it's very understandable why they would have sites like this available. It makes it very easy for campaigns to simply have a QR code or a link that they can send out to garner contributions and donations for a candidate. What happened last year, and it was really June of 2025, is that a former Secretary of the State candidate named Dominic Rapini, he ran in 2022 to be Secretary of the State. He's a cybersecurity specialist.
Okay.
And he analyzed the patterns, I'm going to say, of contributions. And this is where he found that something unusual was happening in Connecticut. And in fact, through his investigation, he was able to find that 18 Connecticut residents, virtually all of them elderly, retired, had made in small contribution amounts, meaning sometimes $5, sometimes $10 or $20, occasionally a little bit more. But they found that there was a huge number of contributions over sometimes a short amount of time where it looked like there was inconsistency there. Okay. So I'll describe this exactly how it was. One of these donors logged 2,549 donations totaling $41,000 since the time that Act Blue first opened, and that was, I'm going to say, 2013.
Okay.
A second donor to Act Blue had logged 7,539 donations totaling $213,163. Several of the dates from that account, and these are Connecticut residents, several of them, the days that they contributed, they made more than 30 donations in a single 24-hour period of time, oftentimes $5, $10, $20. But in total, over 7,539 donations attributed to one donor. And it turns out that these people, when Dominic Rapini contacted them and talked to them, they signed affidavits saying that they did not contribute any of this money.
Oh.
What they're finding out, and this is where a lot of this concern comes up, is that the not only Department of Justice has opened up a criminal investigation, really looking at the facilitation of foreign interference in our elections, because throughout these donations, not just in Connecticut but across the country, thousands of donations came from foreign IP addresses and were paid for with prepaid cards, debit cards. When you also take into account that 19 different state attorney generals are actively investigating both fraudulent fundraising, possible money laundering, and misuse of donor identities, there really is a lot of concern because, again, I don't think that data is going to lie like this when we see these things happening. I can understand that people contribute to political campaigns. I do that, and my supporters, I rely on that in order to apply for the Citizens Election Program grant. But when there's this type of ability to influence an election with potentially unknown money from foreign entities, we need to have some better way to not only see how this money is coming in, but also making sure that these online contribution sites do not allow this type of interference to occur, election interference to occur. Mm-hmm. By far, Act Blue, by a rate of almost $2 to 1 against Win Red and Anadot on the Republican side, takes in more money. You're looking at over $1 billion a year in political contributions. So it's a lot to record and to evaluate, but we need to make sure that these things don't happen in our elections. We already have problems with black money inside of our government, going right back through nonprofits and non-governmental organizations into campaigns across this country. And to see now that there could be potentially foreign interference and money laundering happening through this is more concerning. It does directly tie back, like I said, to Connecticut, because we have these cases. There's 18 Connecticut residents that have signed affidavits saying that they were not part of these contributions or donations to campaigns and political sites over this time period. And finally, I think that we are starting to get somewhere, because just last week, I'm pretty sure it was the chief financial officer was one of the people from Act Blue who was brought in front of Congress. And when questioned about some of these things, pled the fifth 146 times during this congressional hearing. And it wasn't just one person. It was multiple people from Act Blue that were part of this congressional hearing. But across the board, on virtually every question, they just said that they wanted to plead the fifth.
Nothing suspicious there.
No, nothing to see here.
This is all reminiscent of Connecticut just passed a law this past legislative session about like full access absentee ballot voting, right? Mm-hmm. Mm. And this stuff comes under the name of fairness and convenience, like all the
accessibility,
accessibility, all the voter ID laws and all this stuff. And you mentioned this stuff around campaign finance. What really needs to be paramount above everything else for the longevity and stability of our nation is the integrity of elections, not the convenience, not the accessibility, not all these other excuses. Because, like, again, I'm not going to accept the label of being paranoid if I say that we want to pass absentee ballot voting so there can be a greater level of voter fraud. Like we've had rampant problems with election fraud in Connecticut already. Yep. Every single election cycle, there's a massive scandal in the last 10 of them.
Yep.
So integrity has to be the goal above all else, and convenience has to be at the bottom of the list.
And with all those cases of fraud that we saw in Connecticut with our past elections, there's been very little accountability. You look at some of what happened in Bridgeport, and there has been some rulings in the past year where it was pretty much just a slap on the wrist for those things. And
we've seen that time again.
Yeah, we have video of Wanda stuffing handfuls of ballots into a drop box. Like we were a national embarrassment on TV for the rest of the country to see this is how Connecticut's conducting its elections, and there's virtually no accountability for it. Like these people are going to get off scot-free, and you heard other people who were kind of swept up with all of this Bridgeport fraud saying that they were just doing what they were told by party leaders.
And for every headline news Connecticut voting scandal, there are who knows how many more stories that don't even make the paper, because it's just such a consistent churn. Because, Brian, like you said, there's just so much opportunity based on our changing, evolving, what was the word you used, accessible voting system. There's so much opportunity for funny business. It's just it just seems like it never ends. My parents, my dear parents, were involved in some Democrat on Democrat malfeasance. The city of Hartford threw out any silent observers of counting absentee ballots for a Democrat primary in the city of Hartford. And I mean, clearly, against the rules of fair elections in the state of Connecticut. We're talking about silent observers following the rules set by the moderator at the distance required by the city. Were thrown out of the building and had the police called on them. Again, there was a ruling in the observers' favor, which is great. The consequence was that the staffers had to get a mandatory paid retraining.
Right, yeah, I'm sure that really is going to dissuade them from doing it again.
Absolutely,
in November.
the punishment fit the crime in that case for sure.
What better way to discourage and demotivate an electorate other than making it outrageously obvious that election integrity is optional?
Yeah. This brings me to one related point, and it does have to do with something that I think will help with transparency and accountability in Connecticut. This is actually from the Yankee Institute. And last week, they proposed legislation, and they're calling it the ERIN Act, E-R-I-N, and it stands for Expenditure Records and Information Notification. Goes right along with, again, the waste, fraud, and abuse that we're seeing in Connecticut state government, specifically with agencies that tend to have appointed officials by the party that is in control at that time. But when we look at a lot of the cases that have made news in the past year, such as the chancellor of the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities and the P cards and expenditures that were not approved or questionable, this act is really going to take that concern head on. And with this Expenditure Records and Information Notification Act, ERIN Act, what it's trying to do is to reform the requirements of the executive branch agencies to publish, like immediately in a centralized database, all the purchase card transactions, to include information that you normally have to put in there. The card holder, the vendor who the money's going to, the transaction date and amount. These are all things that should be logged, but audits in Connecticut by auditors looking at these agencies are finding that not only is this happening, but it's happening over and over again. And like you said, sometimes all it is just a retraining and nobody gets the message and nobody's held accountable. And we see these same problems happening over and over again in these agencies. And at least at this point, if this ERIN Act passes, what they want is for this to be something that has to be done right away. So as soon as you purchase something with your P card, it has to be available on this website for really anybody to see. That way it's something that's a notification before it has to be a year later and go to an auditor and then be found. That's going to hopefully prevent a lot of this irregular spending, questionable purchases, and stuff, because if you know you're going to be looked at any time by anybody and not just simply getting audited at the end of the year or the end of every 2 years, hopefully this will dissuade people from some of these questionable expenditures that we're seeing. But at some point, I think that we need to really look at accountability here within our own state government, because a lot of the mandatory reporting is not happening. And then also, on top of that, when it is put in and it's missing things like supervisor approvals or copies of receipts, if it's not there, who is following that up? And what we're finding is that it's not being followed up. It's just being pushed along to the next agency appointee that comes in and decides whether they're going to or not going to enforce any of this.
That's one of the beauties of the information age,
right,
of getting information like this online and just making it very accessible, and the public will sniff stuff out.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Given time and motivation, that'll be an actual deterrent against, against improper behavior of various kinds. If there will be a real audit trail that anybody can look at.
I agree. I mean, you don't have to FOIA anything to see that if it's there and available, especially for, some of the heads of these agencies are getting, as appointees, very large salaries, purchase cards that they could be spending thousands, monthly on taxpayer.
Yes, you said this was the Yankee Institute?
The Yankee Institute.
I think they're the ones that years ago made that website, CT Sunlight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great website to see, how many professors are getting paid $400,000 a year to shove
one class.
and to shove horrendous ideas into young minds.
Yeah.
Like we're spending a fortune on this, and are we getting a return for it?
Well, some would say we're getting a great return on it. I think it depends on how you feel about those ideas. Some people
It sure does.
Some people think it's a great return.
A lot of people do, but not everybody.
Yeah. Well, we have a few minutes left in the show here. Do you have anything, Curtis, coming up in the next week here in the town of Windham that people need to know about and listen or pay attention to?
Our world famous parade coming up tomorrow. Which
I was going to talk about that in another couple minutes.
I'll let you steer that boat. Well, let me talk about. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Now, thank you. We can edit that out, right? This isn't live, is it? Oh well.
Yeah, you're okay, Chris.
Well, you asked me if there's anything new
it.
going on, and the answer is it seems like there's always something new going on. There is going to be another budget referendum vote coming up in the town of Windham. As we know, we've now had 2 failed budget referendum votes for both the Board of Education and the general government budget here in the town of Windham. Last night there was a Board of Finance meeting where they have set a date for September 22nd, and from what I understand, there's some social media storm about that, Chris. Now, I haven't been online today, so you're going to have to fill me in.
I'm going to say that I saw a post on Facebook early this morning talking about it. I wasn't there, so I do not know what happened. I really would encourage it if anybody wants to see the Board of Finance meeting. That is accessible online, correct?
Yes, we now video record all the Board of Finance meetings. It may take a day or two to post, but you can check out windhamct.gov. Go to the meeting schedules for the Board of Finance, and you'll be able to see next to the agenda links. You'll be able to see the video link that's available.
Yeah, we were talking about it just over the commercial break. That's why Curtis brought that up. I will say that there was some social media back and forth.
Okay.
Clearly partisan in nature. And because I'm not there, I'm not really sure what it was specifically in reference to, but they were saying that there was some misunderstanding about particularly one phrase being used. And it had to do with prior to or a date.
So
like I said, I only saw this for just a couple minutes this morning.
Voters.
Yes.
Now, as some of you know, I sit on the Windham Board of Finance. The registrars of voters participated in the meeting because they're the ones that run our referendums, run our elections, right?
Yeah.
So they wanted to make sure that they were there with the Board of Finance when the Board of Finance was setting a future budget referendum. They want to be able to talk about the logistics because I don't think. Certainly, I didn't appreciate until I helped volunteer for some elections exactly how much goes into an election day, a referendum day in Connecticut these days. There's just so much regulation, so much red tape, so much changes from years to years. So, the registrars of voters was there trying to give guidance on what would be involved in scheduling a referendum. The registrars of voters let the Board of Finance know that the August primary for the Democratic Party, after that gets conducted, due to state regulations, the machines get physically locked for a period of time after the elections.
Yes.
So there's only so much time closer to those primaries that they can be unlocked and then be tested again. The machines have to be tested each time before each election.
Yep.
The same applies after any date set for the referendum. What happens after the referendum, we talked about it being set on September 22nd, is early voting in the state of Connecticut. Now, starting this year, early voting, which is going to happen for, is it 30 days before every every election? See, the
I'm
rules
gonna have to
change
check
so
on
often.
that. Yeah, because it was 14
Now,
for the general.
there we go. So for the unbelievable number of days of early voting, the same rule applies. If we schedule our budget referendum too close to the general election, again the machines
Yeah.
have to be locked for a period of time. Then once they're unlocked, then they have to be tested. Once they're then tested, they can then be deployed for the early voting, and now machines have to be used for early voting. It used to be sort of like absentee voting, where you put it in an envelope and they would count it later. State of Connecticut changed the rule again.
Yep.
Now we have to have those machines on there and live for the entire period of early voting. So they really clearly laid out what kind of time they would need between the budget referendum and the upcoming elections in November, the statewide elections, and how to nestle that against the primaries, which are happening in August.
So pretty much August, September, October,
Yeah, it's almost
the
cleared out.
ROVs
but
are going to be busy.
They had some suggestions, and it looks like their suggestions were set aside. They were the registrars of voters clearly said that if the budget referendum were set on either of the last two Tuesdays in September, the 22nd or the 29th, there would not be enough time to have the machines unlocked and then tested and then deployed for early voting. So they asked for any date prior to the 22nd of September. To which then a motion was entered on the floor to set the budget referendum for the 22nd of December. September, because that is when the Board of Education had requested the referendums be set. Now, the reasons why, I can't really say. I'm sure people online talked about the idea of using our school children for getting the vote out. I'm sure that's always talked about online. I don't need to dive into that with you today. We all feel the way we feel about that. Now, the Board of Finance is allowed to disregard the registrars of voters and listen to the suggestions of the Board of Ed for what's convenient for them for getting out their vote. They have every right to do so. However, because the registrars of voters, their job is so regulated, if they physically cannot do the job, they are going to encumber the town with additional costs to either purchase more machines or hire outside contractors to be able to do the testing within the time frame needed for that. So that's a huge cost and encumbrance for the town for the convenience of a get out the vote campaign, which will hypothetically shift the sands. Also interesting that
Why does the town want get out the vote campaigns? This is a influence the vote campaign. Is that the topic I'm not supposed to bring up?
Why don't we talk about that, Brian?
No, I'll change the subject for a second. Just this whole early voting thing is yet another example of violating the principle of integrity needs to be the highest order.
Yep.
This is a needless complication. We survived how many hundreds of years as a nation without early voting? We need simple, clean, and the most trustworthy election format we can come up with. And all this stuff is just an unnecessary complication.
Yes, you're absolutely right. To layer on early voting, no excuse absentee balloting, a piece of mail with your name on it that may or may not have a postage stamp counts as a form of ID. All these strange notions about to complicate our elections. It's just crazy. We're sitting here talking. We're all involved in local or state governments or politics in some way, but even we can't keep up with all the crazy changes that are going on.
Yeah.
How many days is early voting? What counts as ID?
Yep. So this is the end of our show for this Thursday. Be sure to tune in next week to Right Now. Thank you guys, Brian and Curtis, for being here. Everybody, enjoy the 4th of July and the Boombox Parade. We'll be back next Thursday.